Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would like to continue on with our discussions with regards to the works that have been directed by the great artist of cinema, the great cinema provocateur, the great maestro, if you will, and the wonderful, imaginative, creative force extraordinaire. That is David Cronenberg. And today, it is my great pleasure to discuss a work that he directed. It's described as being from 1979, and it is this work, Fast Company. And Fast Company stars William Smith, Claudia Jennings, Nicholas Campbell, John Saxon, and others. And so this is a film that is focusing in on the culture and the environment and the setting and indeed the plot and rivalries that surround and indeed directly involve racing and drag racing and the specific components of such world, the racing world, as it relates to a number of really interesting factors. So first of all, we have the various subgroupings or subcategories within this particular racing world, depending on the class, depending on the make and model and the size and the other technical specifications of the actual automobile or the vehicle in question. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, of course, the very, I think, very human relationships in very, I think, relatable and accessible detail that emerge, because this feels like an ensemble piece with a really great set of characters that have different components and different positionings. And I mentioned the great cast of people like William Smith and John Saxon and Claudia Jennings and Nicholas Campbell, for example. And then also we have in that cast, or in those different positionings, we have, of course, various interests or interest groups that can be said to be at play. And so, for example, or perhaps in a very fundamental way, or one of the fundamental ways, is the notion of, say, the individual spirit and the corporate interest, corporate sponsorship interest. That's Fast Company. The phrase Fast Company could be said to have many meanings, a double entendre in a manner of speaking, when one considers the plot, especially this idea of corporate sponsorship interests versus the individual spirit, and which side will prevail in the event of a clash or confrontation and the like. And that's where we get, in particular, a very, I think, memorable performance, one of many memorable performances in the life and career of the great John Saxon. So that is another very interesting and exciting component of this work, Fast Company. And then, together with that, we have the racing scenes and the very exciting racing scenes that are involved, and they are quite thrilling, and they are very much indeed filled with a lot of drama and a lot of investment. I mean, they are shot in a way that we can understand who the drivers are. We can understand the physics, especially for people like myself who aren't necessarily expert or well-versed in the world of racing. So I'm very much a type of neophyte or beginner when it comes to the world and the rules and the setup and the whole physics, if you will. But I can understand the concepts as they are presented by David Cronenberg and company in Fast Company, because they are presented in a very easy to relate way, an easy to understand way, in terms of the setup, in terms of who's racing who, in terms of what the stakes are, what the end objective is, and what happens if something goes wrong, and that sort of thing, and how to fix it. And I like that very methodical approach to the racing and to the pre-warming setup, the pre-warm-up, as it were, and then, of course, the aftermath and things to come, and how that also links to the plot development and the way in which the characters then interact with each other again as the plot levels increase, as the intrigue levels increase as well. Intrigue level leads to further intrigue level leads to further intrigue level. As I say, this is an ensemble piece with a kind of a very wide-ranging plot or series of subplots. It's really hangs together really nicely. So this, therefore, is the work Fast Company from David Cronenberg. Now, it it should be noted, or it can be noted, that perhaps for a number of people, and indeed perhaps as it's been regarded by a number of, say, critics circles and reviewers over time since its initial release in 1979, maybe it might be said that some people regard this film, Fast Company, say, as a quote-unquote anomaly in the context of the filmography of David Cronenberg. After all, it is not a horror film per se. It is not a film that involves a type of practical special effect or special effect set pieces of that nature that form part of the backbone, if you will, of the plot or themes or proceedings. So it doesn't have those sorts of features that one might have seen in, say, earlier works like Shivers or Rabbit, or some works that might follow immediately after this. So, in that way, it has been regarded by some, and perhaps by many, as being a quote unquote anomaly in the context of the filmography of David Cronenberg. However, one can also view this very comfortably, in fact, within the context of the filmography of David Cronenberg, very well. And there are a number of themes and connections that one can say exist. So, first off, we have, let's say, behind the camera, we have a number of figures that emerge here in the making of Fast Company that will be very much part and prominent in the, say, the working group of David Cronenberg directed features. So we have, for example, Carol Spear, and also director of photography Mark Irwin, etc. And whose one should note here, for example, Mark Irwin, whose look and aesthetic in terms of the photography aspect will be very key in what is will be known as going forward as this very important period in the works of David Cronenberg. So this is very important in terms of that connectivity with between this film and the rest of the filmography of David Cronenberg. So that's one aspect. Another aspect to keep in mind is, I should also mention to the casting here, like Nicholas Campbell, who's a member of Fast Company. We might see him in other roles going forward in other Cronenberg films as well. So that's another example there in terms of the working group, as it were, the troupe, as it were. Another example, another way in which this film can be said to be connected to the filmography of Cronenberg is the focus on, say, racing and vehicles and speed and the like. Cronenberg has been very vocal, and when he speaks about his love of racing, his love of cars, his love of motorcycles, etc., we even got a sense of that in a film that he did prior to this, which is called Rabbit. If you know the film Rabbit, you'll know or recall the opening shots of that film, and the title sequence do involve motorcycles and very critical characters in that film, and motorcycle riding, and very fast speeds and high speeds. So Cronenberg does have a love for speed and the adrenaline and the machinery and the vehicles and the nature of the vehicles and the vehicular makeup and technical specifications and the like. And we get a lot of that here. And as I mentioned, we get a lot of the film devoted to, say, the tune-ups and the engine types and the stylings and the looks and the subcategories of racing, etc., as well as the actual race scenes themselves, the racing scenes themselves, which are very thrilling, filled with a lot of sounds, a lot of roars, as well as a lot of cheers from the audience, and a lot of intensity and a lot of speed. A lot of speed. And so this is a very important aspect of this film, and thus one can say this is linked to the David Cronenberg filmography in that way. Also, and perhaps related to this point, another way in which this film can be said very comfortably to be related to the filmography of David Cronenberg is the idea of a type of transformation. Now, this transformation, I think, can be said in Fast Company to be taking place in two components. So the first component is the notion of the speed and the race, and how the race car driver is in one state at the start of the race, and then the race car driver is in a say a completely different state at the end of the race. And so there is this way in which the actual race itself has transformed the driver in some way, maybe in an emotional state, or maybe because of the result of the race leading to the further development of the plot from point A to point B to point C, etc. So whether it's in the context of a specific plot detail, or whether it's in the context of, say, the actual emotional and psychological state of the character, who is the racer, that we can either that can either be directly presented to us as viewers, or maybe suggested, implied, etc. Whatever the case may be, there is this notion here of the transformative aspect of the race element itself, and we do see this notion of the transformative aspect of the race, or the speed, or the high speed riding, the motorcycle riding, the car rides, etc. We did see it, for example, in the film Rabid, the earlier film from Cronenberg, in a very vivid way, how a motorcycle ride could turn incredibly transformative. It transforms one of the main characters in a very significant way. So that is one aspect that's very important. We may see it in other films going forward, in particular films like The Dead Zone, or films like Crash. Those discussions to be saved for another day, to be continued. But for now, for Fast Company, I think that aspect is very much part of it, even if it's in not necessarily in the context of, say, a horror or genre film per se. It is still very much part of the plot and proceedings of Fast Company. So that is itself a very important Cronenberg aspect, very, very important. And related to that too, the idea of transformation, not just in the concept of speed and acceleration, but also in the concept of technology and the inner body and the outer body. And I'm speaking of the tools that are used, that are employed, that are used by the people here, by the characters here, and how the equipment, the cars and the vehicles, etc., how they become extensions of the people themselves. And one can see how this act of transformation can also take on a physical form, as well as a type of emotional state of mind, because the physical form is the racer and the car and the vehicle, and that becomes the outer body, if you will, or the extension of the body, if you will. And we've seen in Cronenberg works the idea of the physical body maybe having its own limitations itself, but then having to rely on some kind of outer apparatus or outer equipment that itself becomes, either metaphorically or perhaps even quite directly physically, becomes an extension of the body itself. And in that process, almost, we have this evolution of the outer components evolving to become actually part of the body itself. Now, in Fast Company, perhaps we don't go that step per se in terms of a step towards evolution, but what I am saying here is that at the very least we do have this idea of the extension of the body via the race car and the equipment and the technology. And so that is a very key component. You know, we see the cars and we realize and we understand who the drivers are, and they become it's the act of what's the phrase, personification, the personification of what otherwise are inanimate objects, that one can say, although they do have a life of their own, and that life of their own is further fueled by the drivers that drive them. And so this is, I think, a very Cronenberg concept, and it's very prevalent here and very important here in this film, Fast Company. And then there are other concepts, too, that one can say are very Cronenberg-esque. So, for example, there is the notion of a type of aspect of corporate sponsorship or corporate greed, versus the individual unique spirit, and we might see some, and that theme is a very important plot development as well as setting up, quote unquote, the heroes and villains of the piece, Fast Company. And so this is a very important concept that we might see develop over time in the Cronenberg filmography body. For example, say Videodrome, but it's a very prevalent and key component here because it forms the backbone of the rivalries that take place. And there are various rivalries that take place over the plot of Fast Company in a fascinating development manner. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, too, is the human emotions, the human relationships here. The love stories and the kindling or rekindling of romance and relationships, and maybe the rejections and also the sense of friendship and camaraderie, buddy-to-buddy relationships, as well as the relationships between intimate lovers, people who have not met over some time because of traveling on the road, but now they are rekindling their romantic feelings, etc. These relationships, as well as connections on an emotional level, on a physical and sexual level, etc. Sometimes those scenes are played maybe in a sense of frolicking, light ways, or maybe even a comic way, but also they can be played in a very intimate and very significant way. And so we understand too that Cronenberg is a filmmaker who's also very much a humanist filmmaker, who's a filmmaker who is concerned in many of his works about the key role of relationships, of human relationships, and how there are many different forms and types of human relationships, and how they have an emotional and physical bond component to them, whatever the case may be. And so, here they are presented in a wide array, an ensemble, a tapestry of various characters that are presented really, really well. And so we have seen this in past works, and we will see it again. For instance, one of his early works, which is called Stereo. I think one can say this to be one of the ultimate human relationship films. And so we have seen early on how relationships are very important in a David Cronenberg work of art. And here in Fast Company, the relationship components, as I say, the various, say, bonds that we see emerge and broken and reformed, and the rivalries, as well as the tensions and romantic interests, etc. This is the human element of David Cronenberg to the max, which has been there in the past, which is here in the present in Fast Company, and I dare say, which may be present in future works that we will discuss later. But in any event, those are some of the reasons that I can see that makes Fast Company, this film by David Cronenberg, a very David Cronenberg work. For those reasons and others, this is one to check out if you can. As I say, it is a work that, as it might seem to be an anomaly from certain perspectives, but whether you view it as an anomaly or not, it is still a film that is well worth checking out. If you are checking out the filmography of David Cronenberg, this is a film that is well worth checking out. It is very entertaining. The race scenes are very enthralling and exciting and suspenseful, and there is, as I mentioned, a very well-layered set of human stories that make this a very relatable and very accessible film from David Cronenberg and company. This is the film Fast Company. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.